The call came in at 11:14 on a Tuesday morning. A woman's voice, clipped and certain, told the dispatcher that her neighbor was acting suspicious, that he had been coming and going at strange hours, that there were unfamiliar vehicles parked on the street near his house, that she didn't know what he did for work, and that in itself, she said, was a problem. The dispatcher asked for the address. She gave it without hesitating. By 11:27, a patrol car rolled slowly down Meridian Grove Lane in Crestfield, Ohio, a suburb that smelled of freshly cut grass and vinyl siding and the particular kind of quiet that settles over neighborhoods where everyone believes nothing bad can happen. The officer stepped out. He adjusted his belt. He walked toward the house with the navy blue door and the 2 clay pots of begonias on the front step, and he knocked. Darnell Whitfield answered, holding a dish towel. He was 38 years old. He had flour on his left sleeve. His daughter, who was 7, was somewhere in the kitchen behind him, making what she called a mess, but what he called progress. The officer said a neighbor had called with some concerns. Darnell said, all right. The officer said he just needed to ask a few questions. Darnell said, go ahead. He answered everything the officer asked. He was calm. He was courteous. He was everything a man has to be when a police car sits in front of his house, and the neighbors on both sides have found reasons to step onto their porches. The officer thanked him, returned to his car, and drove away. That should have been the end of it. But Sandra Kowalczyk was watching from behind her curtain. And for Sandra Kowalczyk, this was not the end of anything. It was the beginning. She had already written down the license plates. She had already taken photographs. And she had already composed in her mind the next call she was going to make. Not to the local police this time, to a federal tip line. She hit send on a Tuesday. By Friday, a black van with tinted windows and no visible markings sat 2 blocks from Meridian Grove Lane, and inside it, 2 agents from the Department of Homeland Security reviewed a dossier on Sandra Kowalczyk. Not on Darnell Whitfield, on her. If this story moved you, stay right here. Drop your city in the comments below. Let us know where you are watching from. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it now and ring the bell, because the story you just heard the beginning of goes places that we did not see coming. Everything that happened after that van appeared on the street changed the understanding of every person involved. And we are going to walk through all of it, start to finish. Don't go anywhere. Darnell Whitfield had lived on Meridian Grove Lane for 3 years by the time any of this happened. He had moved there from Columbus after the funeral, which was a sentence he had learned to say in his head as a single unit. The way you say a word, so many times it stops sounding like a word. After the funeral, after Renee, after the accident on Route 33 that lasted 4 seconds and rearranged every remaining fact of his life. People do not talk honestly about what the first year looks like after something like that. They talk about grief in general terms, as if it is a weather system that passes through and leaves the landscape intact. It does not leave the landscape intact. Darnell had learned this in the grocery store, in the school pickup line, in the middle of the night, standing at the kitchen sink, with the water running, because the sound of it was the only thing that approximated company. He had learned it in the specific silence of a house where another person used to exist. He had Maya. That was the sentence beneath every other sentence. He had moved through the first year doing what needed to be done, which was everything always, because he was now the only person doing it. He scheduled the pediatric appointments and packed the lunches and attended the school conferences and read the bedtime stories and held it together in the ways you can see. And then came downstairs and sat in the kitchen, after Maya was asleep, and held it together in the ways no one sees either, which is its own kind of labor. He did not ask for help often. When he did, he was specific about what he needed, which people found easier than the open-ended ask, and which also meant he spent a great deal of time figuring out exactly what he needed before he could request it. His mother came from Cleveland 4 weekends a year. His college friend Jerome called every Sunday evening with the reliability of a standing appointment. Carla Reyes brought food sometimes without announcing it, leaving it on the porch. He had never told her how much that mattered. He had bought the house because of the school district. His daughter, Maya, was 4 at the time of the purchase. She would start kindergarten in the fall, and he had gone through 11 school district comparison charts on 3 different websites before deciding that Crestfield Elementary had the reading scores and the teacher retention rate that he trusted. He did not buy the house for the neighborhood. He did not buy it for the status. He bought it because it was 5 minutes from school, and because the backyard had enough space for a swing set, and because the kitchen had a gas range, which mattered to him more than most people understood. Darnell cooked. He had always cooked, even before Renee died, but afterward it became something different. It became the thing he did to make the evenings feel like evenings. He made chili with 2 kinds of beans. He made his grandmother's cornbread from memory, adjusted slightly. The way she always said, adjustment was proof you had understood the original. He made roasted chicken on Sundays because Maya liked to tear the skin off in small pieces and eat it separately, which Renee had done too, and which made him laugh and hurt at the same time, every single week, without fail. His work was harder to explain. On paper, he was a consultant. His firm, a small operation out of a downtown Columbus office he visited 2 or 3 times a month, worked federal contracts. Logistics mostly, analysis. He had a clearance he was not allowed to describe in detail and a job title that took a paragraph to make sense of. And he had learned over years that the easiest answer when people asked what he did was to say something about government work and then change the subject. Most people let it go. Sandra Kowalczyk did not let things go. She had introduced herself the week he moved in, appearing at his door with a plate of cookies that she held in a way that suggested the cookies were a formality, and the looking around his living room was the actual purpose. She was in her mid-60s. She had the posture of someone who had once been told. She had excellent posture and had never forgotten the compliment. She wore khaki pants and a fleece vest in a way that communicated authority over the immediate vicinity. Darnell thanked her for the cookies. She asked what he did. He said he worked in consulting, government contracts, and she nodded in the particular way people nod when they have decided the answer is incomplete. Over the following months, she accumulated observations the way other people accumulate receipts, filing them somewhere internal, reviewing them periodically. She noted that he kept irregular hours. She noted that sometimes a car she did not recognize sat in his driveway for an hour and then left. She noted that he received packages that were not from the usual delivery services. She noted that he did not attend the neighborhood association meetings, which to Sandra were not merely social events but acts of civic obligation, and absence from them was a data point she stored. She was not malicious in the way movie villains are malicious. She was convinced. There is a specific kind of certainty that comes from having lived in one place long enough to believe you own its normal, and anything that deviates from your version of normal is, by definition, a problem. Sandra had lived on Meridian Grove Lane for 19 years. She had watched the neighborhood shift and adjust and welcome new families, and each time she had made a private accounting of whether the shift was acceptable. Most of the times she had concluded that it was more or less within range. Darnell existed slightly outside the range. She could not have told you exactly why, and that gap, the distance between what she felt and what she could articulate, was the most dangerous part of her. People who know why they're suspicious can be reasoned with. People who only know that they are suspicious are like weather. She began keeping a written log in February. It was a notebook with a blue cover that she kept on the small desk in the room she called the office, though the primary use of that room had always been as a place to store things that did not fit elsewhere. She wrote in it every few days, sometimes every day, recording observations with the methodical care of someone who believes the accumulation of detail is itself a form of evidence. She underlined certain entries, she cross-referenced dates. She drew a small asterisk next to anything she considered particularly notable. She showed the notebook to her daughter Patrice during a phone call, describing its contents, and Patrice had said, "Mum," and said it in the tone that daughters use when they are choosing their next sentence carefully, and then said, "Are you sure you should be doing this?" Sandra had told her that someone had to. Patrice had gone quiet in the particular way of someone deciding not to continue an argument they know they cannot win. By April, the log was 4 pages. She showed it to her husband, Gerald, on a Thursday evening, and Gerald read the first page and put it down and said he didn't think they should be involved in this. And Sandra had folded the pages precisely and said she was not asking him to be involved. She was simply informing him of the situation. Gerald went back to his program. Sandra made the first call in May. The second call, the one she made to the federal tip line in late September, came after she saw a woman she didn't recognize arrive at Darnell's house after 9 at night and leave before 6 in the morning. She had written down the time of arrival, the make of the vehicle, and the color of the woman's coat. She typed all of it into the tip form. She pressed submit. She felt she would later say to her daughter over the phone, like she was doing what needed to be done. What Sandra Kowalczyk did not know and could not have known, because it was classified at a level she would never be cleared for, was that Darnell Whitfield was not the subject of any investigation. He was running one. The woman in the dark coat who arrived at 9 and left before 6 was a federal agent named Carla Reyes, who supervised a task force operating out of a Cincinnati field office. The unmarked car that sometimes sat in his driveway belonged to a colleague named Tim Bostwick, who coordinated the data side of the operation. The irregular hours were not suspicious behavior. They were a schedule built around a network of informants, encrypted communications, and handoff protocols that had taken 2.5 years to establish. The operation was called Bridgework. It targeted a money laundering network moving approximately $4 million a month through a chain of small businesses in a 3-state corridor: Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. The businesses were dry cleaners and check cashing offices and 2 storage facilities, and a landscaping company that had never, in 6 years of supposed operation, serviced a single lawn. Darnell had been the primary analyst on Bridgework since its founding. He had come to it from a previous case, a narcotics financing operation that had taken down 11 people and recovered enough cash to make the evening news in 4 cities, though his name had appeared in none of the coverage. That was the nature of the work. The work was the thing, not the recognition. He had joined federal law enforcement at 26, recruited out of a graduate program at Ohio State, where he had been writing a thesis on financial forensics. A woman named Agent Dorothy Haynes had sat across from him at a coffee shop near campus and laid out the opportunity with the practiced clarity of someone who had done this before and knew which part made people say yes. The part that made Darnell say yes was not the salary. It was the sentence. We work on things that actually matter, delivered with the particular flatness of a person who only said things they meant. Dorothy Haynes was now the special agent in charge of the Cincinnati field office. She had overseen every major case Darnell had worked. She was the one who, on the Friday after Sandra Kowalczyk submitted her tip, received a courtesy notification that someone in Crestfield, Ohio, had flagged one of her analysts. She read the notification. She read the tip. She set down her coffee and looked out the window for a moment. Then she said, to no one in particular, all right then, and opened a separate file. By that afternoon, her team had a full background on Sandra Kowalczyk: property records, financial history, membership in 7 local organizations, a series of previous complaints filed with local authorities about various neighbors over a 12-year period. The previous complaints all shared a structural similarity that the youngest analyst on Dorothy's team noted in a 1-sentence memo. Each target had been a person of color who had moved into the neighborhood within the prior 6 months. Dorothy read the memo. She did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "Get me Darnell." He drove to the field office that evening. He sat across from her in the conference room, with the window that looked out over a parking structure, and listened while she explained the situation. She told him what had been reported. She told him what they had found. She told him that this was now a parallel issue and that she needed him to be aware of it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How does this affect the timeline on Bridgework?" She said, "It doesn't, if you're willing." He said he was willing. He drove home. Maya was asleep. He stood in the kitchen for a while and did not turn on the lights. The morning the knock came a second time was a Thursday in October, 41 days after Sandra Kowalczyk had submitted her federal tip. Darnell was in the kitchen. He had dropped Maya at school 40 minutes earlier, watching her walk through the double doors with her backpack that had a small fox embroidered on the front pocket, a detail she had chosen herself and that made him feel, every single morning, something that he did not have a name for. He had come home and started the dishes and was about to sit down with his laptop when the doorbell rang. 2 people stood on his porch. One was a woman in her early 50s with short silver hair and a dark blazer, and she held credentials in a leather case open in her palm. The other was a younger man who stood slightly back and to her right. The woman said, "Mr. Whitfield, I'm Special Agent in charge Dorothy Haynes, Department of Homeland Security." She said, "We need a few minutes of your time." She said it at a volume calibrated precisely to carry to the house across the street. Darnell looked past her for a moment. He looked directly at Sandra Kowalczyk's curtain, which moved slightly, the way a curtain moves when the person behind it has stopped pretending they are not there. He stepped aside and said, "Come in." They sat in his living room. Maya's drawings were on the refrigerator, visible through the open kitchen doorway. A small sneaker sat alone by the couch. Dorothy Haynes looked around the room, the way people look at rooms when they are trained to read them. And then she looked at Darnell and said, "We are here because a tip was filed regarding your address and activities." He said, "I'm aware," she said. "We've completed our assessment." She paused. She said, "I want you to know that the assessment reflects our full knowledge of your background, your work history, and your current assignment." He said, "I understand." She said, "I also want you to know that as a result of the tip and the investigation it triggered, certain patterns have been identified that fall outside the scope of your case." She placed a thin folder on the coffee table. She said, "This is a summary. You can review it at your discretion." He looked at the folder but did not pick it up. She stood. The younger agent stood with her. At the door, she paused and turned and said, "The work you've done on bridge work has been noticed, Darnell. At the level where these things get noticed," he said. "Thank you, Dorothy." She left. He stood in the doorway and watched the dark vehicle pull away from the curb. Then he looked across the street. Sandra Kowalczyk was standing in her driveway, fully outside now, no curtain between them. She was holding a watering can, though nothing around her needed watering. She was staring at him with an expression he would later describe to Carla Reyes on the phone that evening as something between confusion and the beginning of something harder. He nodded at her once. He went back inside. He closed the navy blue door. Sandra Kowalczyk stood in her driveway for 4 minutes after the door closed. The watering can was still in her hand. She had grabbed it on the way out, some automatic reach for a prop that would make her presence seem purposeful. And now it felt wrong, the weight of it ridiculous in a way she could not account for. She had seen the badge. She had seen the credentials. She had seen the woman in the dark blazer hand Darnell Whitfield a folder and speak to him with the particular deference that people in authority use only with other people in authority. And Sandra was experienced enough with the texture of power to know what she had just witnessed was not what she had expected. She had expected the agents to speak with Darnell the way investigators speak with subjects. They had spoken with him the way colleagues speak with a peer. She went inside. Gerald was at the kitchen table reading the paper, and he looked up and he saw her face and he said, "Sandra, what happened?" She said nothing and went to sit in the armchair by the window. And she sat there for a long time, and she did not read anything, and she did not turn on the television, and she did not call her daughter, which was what she normally did when she needed to process something. She sat. The folder had been thin, that kept coming back to her. The folder had been thin, and it had been handed to him without any of the weight or ceremony that accompanies bad news, and she had seen enough of life's administration to know the difference between a document that is a consequence and a document that is a courtesy. That folder was a courtesy. That folder was the kind of thing you give someone to bring them up to speed, not to hold them accountable. She thought about the log she had kept, 4 pages. Dates, times, license plates, observations, her own private case, built up over months with the conviction that she was protecting something. She thought about the word suspicious. She turned it over in her mind the way you turn over a stone that has been sitting in one place a very long time and find that the underside looks nothing like you expected. What had made him suspicious? She reviewed the list honestly for the first time, without the scaffolding of certainty that had held it all together. And the list became, in the reviewing, something different. He kept unusual hours. He worked in a field he did not explain in detail. There were cars she did not recognize. She sat with what was left after she stripped away the language of justification. That evening she went to the desk in the office and opened the drawer and took out the blue notebook and sat with it in her lap. She did not open it. She held it the way you hold something you are deciding whether to keep. The weight of it was not the weight of evidence anymore. It was something else. It was the weight of time spent in the service of a certainty that had not examined itself. She put it in the bottom drawer under the insurance documents. She did not throw it away. She was not ready for that. But she covered it, and that was the beginning of something, even if it was not yet the thing itself. Gerald came in and sat on the couch across from her and did not say anything, and after a while he said, "Did you know he had a daughter?" She said, "What?" He said, I saw her once in the backyard. She had a fox on her backpack. He said, I thought you knew. Sandra said, I didn't know that. Gerald picked up his paper again. Sandra looked out the window at the house with the navy blue door and the 2 clay pots of begonias, which had been tended through the whole summer. The flowers replaced when they faded, the pots never cracked or neglected, which was a kind of daily labor she had noticed without noting. The way you fail to note what you have decided does not count as evidence. 3 days after Dorothy Haynes visited Meridian Grove Lane, bridge work entered its final operational phase. Darnell drove to Cincinnati on a Thursday morning and did not drive back until late Friday night. He texted his neighbor, a woman named Patricia who had 2 teenagers and who watched Maya sometimes in emergencies, and she texted back a thumbs up and a photo of Maya eating cereal with a concentration that made her look like a scientist. He forwarded the photo to Carla Reyes with no comment. She wrote back, "That is a very serious bowl of cereal." He was in a field office conference room for most of those 2 days, reviewing the final summary documents, confirming the sequencing, walking through the arrest protocols with the coordinators in all 3 states. There were 14 names on the primary list. There were 6 associated entities being referred for financial penalties. The evidence was layered and thorough and had the particular density of work that has been assembled slowly, over years, by people who cared more about getting it right than getting it done quickly. Tim Bostwick had built the financial mapping, and it was meticulous. He had traced cash through 12 layers of transaction and come out the other side with something that would be presentable to a jury without needing to be simplified. That mattered. The juries mattered. The work had to survive contact with explanation. On Friday evening, Carla Reyes came and sat in the empty chair beside Darnell, and they looked at the summary together without talking. She said, "You know this is good work," he said. "It's thorough." She said, "I mean it's good, not just thorough." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need to be home by 10. Maya has swimming in the morning." Carla said, "Go." He drove back on the interstate, with the radio off and the windows down slightly, October air moving through the car. And he thought about the begonias, which he had not watered in 2 days, and about whether Maya had remembered to put her permission slip for the November field trip in her backpack, and about the way Dorothy Haynes had said his name at the door before she left, the weight she had put on it, the particular fullness of it that he had filed away quietly to look at again later. He got home at 9:47. The lights were on at Patricia's next door. He sat in the car for a moment before going in. He could see, across the street, that Sandra Kowalczyk's house was dark except for the lamp in the living room window, the one she left on every night, which he had noticed because he noticed things, because he had been trained to notice things and could not turn it off. He went inside. Maya was asleep on the couch with a chapter book open on her chest, which Patricia said had happened approximately 11 minutes after dinner. Darnell stood in the doorway of the living room and looked at his daughter for a long moment. She had Renee's forehead. She had her own everything else, which was its own kind of miracle. The way children are assembled from the people who made them and from themselves simultaneously. He carried her upstairs. She said, without fully waking, "Did you fix it?" He said, "Fix what, baby?" She said, "The thing." He said, "Yeah, we fixed it." She was asleep again before he reached the top of the stairs. It was 11 days later that Sandra Kowalczyk rang Darnell's doorbell. It was a Saturday morning, and he was in the kitchen making pancakes, which he made from scratch on Saturdays because Maya had, at age 5, declared that box pancakes tasted like cardboard wishes, a phrase he had written down on a piece of paper and folded into the kitchen drawer with the takeout menus and the batteries. The doorbell rang and he wiped his hands on the dish towel and went to the door. Sandra Kowalczyk stood on the porch holding a ceramic dish covered in foil. She was wearing a wool coat and she was not wearing her usual expression, the one she had that communicated ownership of the immediate vicinity. She looked like someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say and had arrived at the door less certain of it than they had been at home. He said, "Sandra." She said, "I made too much of this." She held out the dish. "It's a green bean casserole. I made it for a church thing and I always make too much." He looked at the dish. He took it. She said, "I also wanted to say." She paused. "I wanted to say that I was not fully informed about the situation, and I think I should have been more patient before drawing conclusions." It was not a full apology. It was not a confession. It was the opening paragraph of a longer document she was still writing and might never finish. He looked at her for a moment. He said, "I appreciate you coming over, Sandra." She nodded, and she was about to turn when a voice came from behind him in the kitchen, high and certain, the way children's voices are when they have no reason not to be. Maya said, "Who is it?" He said, "Our neighbor." Maya appeared beside him in the doorway. She looked at Sandra Kowalczyk with the frank evaluation of a 7-year-old who is deciding something. She had flour on her hands because she had been, apparently, making a contribution to the pancake project without being asked. She said, "Are those your flowers?" Sandra looked at her. Maya said, "The orange ones. At your house. I like those." Sandra said, "Those are marigolds." Maya said, "Do they come back every year?" Sandra said, "Some of them do, yes." There was a pause. Maya looked up at Darnell and then back at Sandra, and she said, "Do you want to come in? We're making pancakes." Darnell put his hand on Maya's shoulder. He said, "We'll let Miss Sandra get back to her day." He looked at Sandra. He said, "Thank you for the casserole." She said, "Of course." She walked back across the street and he watched her go, the ceramic dish cool in his hands. And he thought about what she had said, not fully informed. It was a strange phrase. It transferred the problem to missing information rather than to judgment, but it was what she had. It was what she had brought to his door on a Saturday morning, and he had taken it, and he had not made it easy, and he had not made it hard. He closed the door. Maya said, "She seems okay." He said, "Yeah." She said, "Are the pancakes going to burn?" He said, "Probably." And they ran back to the kitchen. The arrests on Bridgework happened on a Wednesday. Darnell was not present for any of them. His job had ended at the document phase. He had built the case. Other people executed it. That was always how it worked. He had learned not to need the culminating moment, the cuff click, the perp walk. The real work was never that. He heard about it from Carla Reyes in a text that said, 14 for 14, clean. He was in the school parking lot waiting for the dismissal bell when the text came. He read it once and set the phone face down on the passenger seat. When Maya came out through the double doors, she was wearing her backpack with the fox on the pocket, and she was explaining something to a girl beside her with an intensity that suggested the explanation was very important. She saw the car and broke away and came across the lot in the particular half-run of a child who has learned that running in parking lots is not allowed, but has not fully accepted the philosophy behind it. She got in and pulled the door and said, "Can we get hot chocolate?" he said. "It's 60 degrees. She said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, okay." They drove to the place on Elm Street that she liked, the one with the old wooden booths and the photographs of Crestfield from the 1950s on the walls, and they sat across from each other, and she told him about the thing she had been explaining to the girl in the parking lot, which was a disagreement about whether horses or dolphins were smarter, and her position was that it was the wrong question because smart meant different things in different places, and you had to think about what each animal was smart for. He listened to all of it. He said, "Where did you get that idea?" She said, "I thought it up." He said, "That's a good thought." She stirred her hot chocolate. She said, "Dad." He said, "Yeah." She said, "Are you done with the thing you were doing?" He said, "Pretty much. One more piece." She said, "Okay." She went back to the hot chocolate. Outside the window, a maple tree on the corner had gone fully orange, the color of the marigolds across the street, the ones Sandra had named on Saturday morning, while standing on his porch with a casserole dish she had made too much of. He would remember that detail for reasons he could not fully explain. The marigolds connecting the two conversations, the way the world kept insisting on making patterns, even when you were not looking for them. The last piece took another week. Dorothy Haynes called him on a Thursday afternoon and told him that the deferrals related to the pattern in the tip filings were moving forward through the appropriate channel. She was precise about this. She said appropriate channel in a tone that meant everything was being handled with accuracy and without exaggeration in either direction. She said, "The documentation is thorough." He said, "That's the right approach." She said, "How's Maya?" He said, "She's good. She has a theory about horses and dolphins," Dorothy said. "Send her our way in about 20 years. He said, "Not if I can help it." And she laughed, which was something she did rarely and meant more because of that. After he hung up, he went to the garage and found the thing he had been meaning to do for 3 weeks, which was replace the bulb in the outdoor fixture above the porch. It had been out since September, and every time he came home after dark, he made a note in his head to fix it, and then forgot about it until the next time he came home after dark. He got the stepladder from the corner and set it up on the front porch. He unscrewed the old fixture cover, which was crusted with 2 seasons of dead moths and pollen, and replaced the bulb, and replaced the cover, and stepped back down to the porch and plugged it back in. The light came on. It cast a warm circle over the 2 clay pots of begonias, which had gone slightly leggy in the past week and needed to be cut back, but were still alive, still the color Renee had picked when she had spent 40 minutes at the nursery holding different varieties up to the light before choosing these. He stood on the porch in the October evening and looked at his street. Meridian Grove Lane in the early dark, the streetlights coming on one by one, in the way they did. Every evening, the houses lit up from inside with the ordinary visible light of dinners being made and televisions being watched and children being called to wash their hands. Across the street, Sandra Kowalczyk's front door opened and she came out to bring in her garbage can from the curb, the weekly Thursday ritual he had clocked without thinking about it for 3 years. She looked up. She saw him standing on the porch. She did not wave and he did not wave. She paused for a moment, the garbage can handle in her hand, and then she nodded. Not the nod of greeting, the nod of people who share an understanding that neither of them is ready to name out loud. He nodded back. She pulled the can inside and closed the door. He stood there another moment in the light of the fixture he had finally fixed. In the neighborhood he had chosen because of the school and the kitchen range, and the yard big enough for a swing set. In the life he had built from the ruins of another one, with his daughter upstairs doing her homework and the case he had spent 2 years on finished, and the small repair completed, and the evening quiet around him in a way that felt earned rather than given. He looked at the begonias. He thought he might get new ones in the spring, something different. He would take Maya to the nursery and let her hold them up to the light. He went inside. He left the porch light on.